In the peaceful village of Mazi, life flows like the gentle river that runs through its heart. Here, children laugh and play in the warmth of the sun. But for some, that laughter fades when they step inside the walls of Madam Kemi's classroom. Madam Kemi was feared by every child who entered her class. To her, discipline meant control, and control was everything. With a sharp cane in hand and a piercing glare, she ensured that no one stepped out of line. One by one, the children had felt Madam Kemi's wrath. Kofi, for being late after helping his sick mother, was made to kneel outside in the sun. Amina had been struck for asking a simple question. Sade had been humiliated in front of the class for not reading fast enough. But no matter how much she punished them, nothing changed in her approach. Day after day, the classroom was filled with tension, each child fearful of becoming the next victim of Madam Kemi's wrath. But there was one student, a quiet boy named Tunde, who seemed to be different. He sat at the back, calm and composed, his dark eyes observing everything in silence. And while Kofi, Amina, and Sade feared Madam Kemi's cane, Tunde remained unafraid. Little did Madam Kemi know, her control over the classroom was about to slip. For on one fateful day, when her fury turned toward Tunde, everything would change. Tunde, you think you can sit there and do nothing? Stand up. She raised her cane to strike him, but something happened, something none of the children had ever seen. Madam Kemi froze, her arm unable to move, as if an invisible force held her back. For the first time in her life, Madam Kemi was powerless, and it terrified her daughter. As the days passed, strange things began to happen. Madam Kemi's health deteriorated, and the once feared teacher could barely stand. Whispers spread through the village. Could it be Tunde?
My child says Madam Kemi fell ill after she tried to strike Tunde. Could that boy have something to do with it? The whisper spread through the village like wildfire. Madam Kemi, once feared and respected, was now a subject of speculation. Her illness worsened by the day, and no remedy seemed to help. The doctors were baffled, unable to explain the sudden decline in her health. Meanwhile, the children, particularly Kofi, Amina, and Sade, quietly celebrated her absence, though none would dare say it aloud. Mr. Sade had been hearing the parents' concerns for weeks. They had complained numerous times before, speaking of Madam Kemi's harsh treatment of their children, but he had been reluctant to intervene. After all, Madam Kemi had been with the school for years, and her methods, while strict, had produced disciplined students. But now, with her sudden illness and the rumors swirling around Tunde, Mr. Sade had no choice but to act. Madam Kemi, I've had multiple complaints from parents. They've spoken of your extreme discipline. I've warned you before, but now I fear it's become too much. She knew what Mr. Sade was saying, but her mind kept returning to that moment with Tunde. The way he had looked at her. The way her arm had frozen in midair, unable to deliver the blow. What had happened? Could he truly be the cause of her suffering? As days turned into weeks, Madam Kemi's condition worsened. Her family had brought in healers from neighboring villages, but nothing worked. The whispers in the village grew louder. Some said it was karma, that Madam Kemi was being punished for the cruelty she had inflicted on the children. Others believed that something supernatural was at play. One evening, in the quiet of her darkened room, Madam Kemi's mind raced. She replayed the moment with Tunde over and over again. There was no doubt in her mind now, he was the cause of her illness. Weak and desperate, Madam Kemi made a decision. She needed to seek forgiveness from the boy. It was the only way. Despite her pride, she could feel her life slipping away. If she didn't act soon, she might not survive. With the help of her brother, she made her way to Tunde's house. It was a humble place, tucked away at the edge of the village. The air was thick with suspense as they approached. Ton's mother, a kind woman with gentle eyes, answered the door. She had heard of Madam Kemi's illness but had not expected her to come to their home. When Madam Kemi, now frail and barely able to stand, asked to see Ton, there was no refusal. She knew what her son was capable of, though she had never spoken of it openly. Madam Kemi was led into the small, simple room where Ton sat. He looked up, his eyes meeting hers with that same calm, steady gaze. She hesitated for a moment, her pride struggling against the weight of her illness. But in the end, her desperation won. Ton. I came to ask for your forgiveness. Ton studied her for a long moment. There was no malice in his eyes, no anger for what she had done to him or the others. He simply nodded, as if he had been expecting her all along. I forgive you. The moment the words left his lips, something changed. Madam Kemi felt it immediately, a warmth spreading through her body, a sudden lightness in her chest. The pain, the weakness, it all began to fade. Her strength returned, slowly but surely, as if a great weight had been lifted from her soul. By the time she left Ton's house that evening, Madam Kemi was almost herself again. But she would never be the same. She had learned a lesson far more valuable than any she had ever taught her students, that true strength did not come from fear or control, but from understanding, humility, and forgiveness. Madam Kemi returned to the school, but her approach had changed. The cane no longer held the same power in her hands. Instead, she listened to her students, encouraged them, and treated them with the kindness she had once lacked. The children noticed the change immediately, and slowly, the fear that had once ruled the classroom began to fade. The classroom becomes a place of laughter and learning, where children feel safe and valued. Ton's quiet strength teaches Madam Kemi a lesson she will never forget, that true power comes from compassion. Madam Kemi was sitting under a tree outside the school, gazing into the distance. She has a serene expression, indicating her newfound understanding. Ton plays with other children in the background, embodying joy and innocence. In the village of Mazi, life returned to its peaceful rhythm, but the memory of what had happened between Madam Kemi and Ton remained. It was a story whispered among the villagers, a reminder of the unseen forces that guided their lives, and of the power that lay within each of them. And though Madam Kemi's reign of fear had ended, the lessons learned in her classroom would never be forgotten.